with a new Godzilla anime coming to Netflix soon, I figured I might as well kind of look back and look at the other Kaiju anime Netflix series that came out not too while ago. I'm talking about Pacific Rim: The Black. This is kind of going to be in the same format as my Godzilla vs. Kong video, just kind of more, I have some thoughts written down, I just kind of want to go over them, so I figured that would just be easier than having to type a super long script, because I feel like there's not a ton I want to say about this series, but I feel like there's enough that I might as well make a video about it. So I'll just kind of start with the positives of the film, or not the film, the series. This isn't really related to the pros, but I do kind of like the little Absolute Zero canon reference to Kiryu, the Millennium version of Mechagodzilla. It's at the opening of the first episode. So I thought that was kind of not sure if that was a purposeful reference, but I enjoyed it. Now I'll kind of talk about the positive stuff. One thing is kind of the humor. I think the humor works sometimes. It's not like gut-hurting laughter because you're laughing so hard. It's more like a slight chuckle or like, like that's kind of funny. But I feel like there's also moments that just don't make sense. One of the jokes is they launch all these missiles at Kaiju that's coming. They're like, yes, we killed it. And the AI is like, yes, you were successful, is what I would say if we had any weapons on this jaeger. And it just kind of feels like a weird thing to have an AI programmed to do, especially when it comes to such a life or death situation. So I thought that was kind of weird. I guess an example, one of the jokes that I did find funny is when it's the last episode and they kind of have the Jaeger on stand down, so there's no one in it, and the main antagonist Kaiju of the series, being Copperhead, or at least this first season, finds the Kaiju and starts charging towards it, and right before he hits the Jaeger, the camera cuts to the AI, and the AI is like, of course, and then Copperhead just rams into the Jaeger. I thought that was probably the hardest laugh I got out of me, but other than that, nothing especially stand out in the comedy department. Another thing I really liked is the voice acting for Haley and Taylor. I will look up the voice actors so I can give them the proper credit that they deserve. Just give me a second. So Haley is voiced by Gideon Adlon. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it. I don't know. It's what pictures are for. And then Taylor is voiced by Callum Worthy, which I did not know, and I recognize him from Disney Plus because I am a early 2000s kid. The only other person who kind of stood out to me was Andy McPhee, who played Shane. He also did a good job. I liked his Australian accent. That was pretty cool. I liked a decent amount of the characters. The teens, at least Taylor, he does kind of start off as that edgy anime teen, kind of self-loathing in a way, and I mean, it makes sense given the story, but you're just kind of like, oh, it's another edgy anime boy, but he gets a development, and so does some of the other characters. Boy, he's, character development-wise, they don't really have anything to him. I don't like what they did at the ending though, but I'll talk about that more in depth. Trying to think of the other characters. They're not that. Either I forget stuff easily or I just didn't care. Oh, May. She was one of the other main characters. Voiced by Victoria Grace. She was fine. I kind of like the idea that Shane stole her from her family. It's probably going to be explored upon in later seasons. I'm assuming there's going to be later seasons, but we'll just see about that. There was a hipster guy. I remember that. I just remember he had the courtesy of having his head removed from his shoulders. So that was kind of a shock, which I guess is kind of a shame because he was kind of annoying to me. But probably 5 minutes before he died, he's starting to turn into a likable character. He's trying to help people, even though he's kind of been handicapped at this point due to overdrifting with people who aren't compatible. So it was just kind of funny. You're like, oh yeah, he's a fine character, like, and that's all you probably think about him. And then the show's like, you see, we're killing him off. You're like, okay, I killed the hipster, whatever. I won't lose sleep over that. The action is pretty solid throughout the series. It's nothing special, but it's not bad. I think it's well choreographed. There's problems I have with the action, but in terms of concepts and ideas for the action sequences and where they take place, and I think those are pretty solid. And I think there's some pretty solid action moments with the Jaegers. I also I like a lot of the ideas that they're going for in this series, but I feel like some of them they either hit or they kind of miss. I think ones that hit is like this idea of like these smaller kaiju. These like they kind of look like big Doberman Pinscher kaiju. Uh, like almost seeing them as scouts, which I think it kind of makes sense because when you send these giant 300-foot tall monsters to destroy a city, maybe people are hiding on the ground. So at least from like a war weapon standpoint, it kind of makes sense to send these still pretty big monsters in there, but they're small enough that they can fit into these tight spaces, and then they can have a better chance of eradicating the humans. Kind of reminds me of how some people will go hunting rats. They'll have dogs on the outside waiting for the rats, and then they'll send minks in after into the rat hole to chase out the rat or to kill the rat in there. But that way, if the rat escapes, then the dog is waiting out there, and then if the rat doesn't stay, the mink just kills it in there and then will drag it out, depending on how they're trained. There's only one person I know who trains them well, and he's probably the most famous person, I'm guessing. I don't know. I don't know any other people who do what he does. I think another one of the concepts that works is the world building and the market idea of how there's kind of this black market for exotic kaiju parts. Specifically, these kaiju eggs are kind of like a main focus brought up early in the series, and how they'll be trading them with these other kind of gangs for in exchange for Jaeger parts. So that way people are trying to build their own Jaegers in either order to survive in this kind of this wasteland that there's nothing left because all the kaiju have taken over Australia. Other concepts I like. There's a couple I have mixed feelings about. I guess probably the main one. Actually, there's one more cool thing that I really like. I like the kaiju designs. I really like the one kind of snake head. Reminded me of a more Eastern typed dragon, the river kaiju, and how it would eat a person and it almost shred them up in its mouth, and it would shoot all the blood and stuff out of its gills. As gruesome as that is, it's kind of a cool function to see something more than just a big scaly reptile that goes roar and smashes things. I like the copper-headed design of it. It's kind of cool to see a more four-legged kaiju within the Pacific Rim series, specifically speaking. Because at least all the ones in, I guess there was one in Pacific Rim Uprising, but we don't really talk about that film. But at least referring to the original Pacific Rim movie, all of them were bipedal for the most part. So I thought it was kind of cool to see a different design of that. That's kind of one thing I talked about in my Godzilla vs. Kong review. So it's cool to see a wider range of movements and how these creatures are built as opposed to what they were doing in the film prior. I guess the things that I didn't really like about the series. I did not like the reuse of the same kaiju designs. If you've seen the series, you know which ones I'm talking about. It's the ones that have the big legs, and they kind of have these three tails. They have these two tentacles on their shoulders, and then they have a big tail, and they kind of have like a shark-looking head, and they have little teeny baby legs. But they use that same design over and over again, and it just really bugged me because they didn't specify if that was some kind of drone kaiju. Like for B's example, not every bee is gonna be. There are different types of bees within a specific hive, but obviously you're gonna have the workers, the drones, the warriors. So if they had specified like, oh, these type of kaiju are like drone kaiju, they're much easier to make and they're not as powerful as maybe these custom made kaiju, but they can still get the job done and we can just send a bunch of them. But they never specified that. And each time they show one, it kind of acts like it's a brand new kaiju that you've never seen. They're like, oh, it's Acid Quill. And they're like, no, it's the one we just saw prior. But I get that you're going to have a budget, but it was just kind of weird because even within the same scene, you would see three different ones and they'd be like, it's three different kaiju or whatever. So that kind of bugged me. Another thing that bugged me was the action scenes. Even though I was saying I liked them, I like the ideas behind them. it's the execution that bugged me. These kaiju, not really the kaiju, well, one kaiju, but the jaegers and kaiju, they all move really, really fast. If you think Pacific Rim Uprising sped up the jaegers too much, kind of taking away that realism, uh, definitely does that a lot more in here than Uprising. The series is way better than Uprising, by the way. I'm not saying it's a terrible series. It's okay. If you're interested in it, you'll probably like it. I thought it was fine. It's about as generous as I can be with it. But it was just kind of annoying to see these Jaeger kaijus. They're like grabbing each other and smashing each other, kind of like Hulk with Loki, and it almost takes away some of the impacts and power that these things have. Although one of these issues stems from probably my biggest issue with this series, and it's the plot twist with Boy. When you find Boy, they find him in a secret lab, and he's in a tank, and they free him, and then they kind of befriend him. He doesn't speak. He's kind of one of those wild child tropes, but he's fine. But then they kind of find out he starts like showing that he's really powerful in weird ways. Like he gets bit by a super venomous snake or something like that, and there's no bite marks, and he doesn't really react to it. And then later, once they meet the biomech, or the biomech, the Kaiju Jaeger hybrid drone that kind of formed its own consciousness from the Uprising. Apparently, one of those is now evolved, so now it's just a special looking one. It kind of looks like the Insecticons from Transformers Prime. In a way, that's kind of how I thought about it. So, I thought that was cool. But that thing is jumping all over the place, and yeah, it was just kind of weird. That was one of the problems. But Boy, he like holds it off as it tries to punch in the Jaeger that the main characters are driving, which by the way has a really horrible looking paint job. Or at least I'm not a fan of it. The actual design of it I think is fine, but or that's my case. But the plot twist with Boy, it's as Copperhead is charging towards a knocked out Haley, and Boy's standing right in front of him, and then all of a sudden in a bright flash explosion, you cut to Haley, and she looks up, and Boy is no longer there, but it's now this kind of small-ish kaiju. I just thought that was really dumb. Here's the reason why that bugged me so much. Because the first Pacific Rim, as sci-fi and kind of cheesy as it was in some parts, it still felt as real as how our world would react to that situation as it possibly could, while still allowing for, the more sci-fi and fantastical elements to still take place. But still felt like a pretty grounded movie considering the concept and premise. Pacific Rim Uprising did not feel like that. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people didn't like that film. You have these Jaegers that are moving way too fast and doing front flips and all these other things, and it just doesn't fit the universe, so it just kind of stands out like a sore thumb. So even though it's these cool action scenes, when you see a Jaeger running up a kaiju's back and doing a front flip off of it as it slices it in the back, you just can't help think, wow, I don't think we could ever build giant robots that would even be able to do that unless it was set in a completely 100% futuristic, no hold bars, sci-fi, Star Wars, Star Trek, cyberpunk universe. And then here you have at least this kid, he is now a bioweapon that can just turn into a kaiju instantly. The design of it is fine, but he's doing these super punches, and he's doing this crazy triple backflip as he bounces off the monster, and I don't know. Just seeing that, it really took me out of the scene. I'm curious on where it will go, if there's going to be more people like that. Because even something like that, it's kind of jumping the shark for me. So, we'll see where this series goes. I'll probably keep watching it. It's not going to be my first choice of TV series, let alone streaming TV series. There's a whole lot more that I am currently watching and want to watch now. So yeah, we'll kind of see where this series goes. I won't be too harsh on it because you still have to kind of see where it goes, because obviously it's setting some stuff up, and I acknowledge that. But given all that, I think it's a fine series that's worth a watch if you're interested in it. If you want to see more from the Pacific Rim universe. Other than that, if you're not that interested in it, I wouldn't recommend it. So, it's just kind of what your impressions were. It's better than the Godzilla anime trilogy, so I mean that's a pretty low bar to clear, but I'll give it that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I have to say for this series. Not a whole lot. Alright, coming up next for the next video that I'll work on, depending on how my schedule works, I'm probably gonna crank out the WandaVision video, because there's a lot I want to unpack with that series. It started off with promise, and I've not seen a series crash so hard and fail so spectacularly on its ending, probably since Game of Thrones. So if you're ready for me to rip WandaVision a new one, then stay tuned. Until then, have a great day.